Omaha Beach. Dawn, the 6th of June, 1944. A young American soldier crouches in the belly of a landing craft, packed shoulder to shoulder with 30 other men, as it pitches through the gray swell toward the shore. He is 19, maybe 20. He has been told the beach was bombed flat, that the guns on the bluffs above are already silenced, that the first wave will walk ashore almost unopposed. He wants, desperately, to believe it. The ramp is still up. He can see nothing but the men around him and the sky. And then the boat grinds to a halt. The ramp slams down, and the world outside crashes into view. For half a second, there is only the beach and the bluffs, and a strange ripping sound rolling down from above, like an enormous sheet of canvas being torn clean in two. Then the front of the boat vanishes into it. A German machine gun, dug into the high ground, has been waiting for exactly this moment for the ramp to drop. It fires so fast, the shots blur into one long, tearing roar, and it sweeps the open mouth of the landing craft like a fire hose. Men fall before they can take a single step. Some are cut down, still inside the boat. He goes over the side into water churning white with bullets, and he wades, and he crawls toward a steel obstacle half buried in the sand. He presses himself against it, chest heaving, as that sound passes back and forth just above his head. He does not know it yet, but his company, a company of the 116th Infantry, is being destroyed all around him. Within 5 minutes of the ramps dropping, it will have ceased to exist as a fighting force. 91 men killed, 65 more wounded, on a single strip of sand, and nearly all of it, the destruction of an entire company in 300 seconds, is the work of machine guns firing down from the bluffs. Hold that beach in your mind for a moment. The sand, the sound, the men who never made it out of the water. Because to understand that morning, you first have to understand the weapon behind that sound. And you have to understand something stranger still, that the men who built it, the finest machine gun of the entire war, still lost. That sound carried a name the men who lived through it never forgot. The Germans called it the Knochensäge, the bone saw. The Americans called it Hitler's Buzzsaw. The Soviets called it the Linoleum Ripper. This was a sound that traveled ahead of the gun itself into the letters home, the rumors, the nightmares of men who had not yet even reached the front. Every one of those names was reaching and failing to capture the same impossible noise. This is the story of that gun, the MG42, and of the American machine gun that had to answer it, the Browning M1919. And this is the part that should stop you cold by almost every measure that matters. The German gun was the best machine gun of the Second World War. It fired more than twice as fast as anything the Americans had. Soldiers on every front were terrified of it, and for decades afterward, the armies of the world would scramble to copy it, and yet Germany lost the war on the ground. Remember, in infantry combat, the machine gun is the weapon that does the mass, killing the gun, that pins a company in the mud, that turns a beach into a graveyard, that decides who can move and who cannot. So if Germany built the finest one of the entire war, why didn't that gun win? It is one of the strangest puzzles of the entire war. The side that built the deadliest infantry weapon on the planet was the side that lost the ground. It was fired across, and the reason is not a story about steel, or engineering, or rate of fire. It is a story about an idea. The answer has almost nothing to do with the machine gun itself. It has everything to do with two completely different ideas about how a squad should fight, and with the two very different men who built the weapons at their heart. One of those men was a living legend. The other had never designed a gun in his life. Their two guns would meet across the beaches of Normandy, the hedgerows of France, the snow of the Ardennes, and the long agony of the Eastern Front. To understand how the losing side built the better weapon, you have to meet them both. And it begins, strangely enough, not with a gun at all, but with a simple problem of arithmetic. By 1942, the German army had a problem, and it was not the one you would expect. It already possessed a superb machine gun, the MG34. In truth, the MG34 had been a genuine revolution, arguably the first true general-purpose machine gun the world had ever seen. One weapon that could do everything. light enough to carry forward on a bipod in the assault, yet able to lock onto a tripod and pour out sustained fire like a heavy gun. Nearly every modern Army's machine gun today descends from that single idea. But the MG34 carried a fatal flaw, and it had nothing to do with the way it fired. The gun was beautifully made, finely machined, precisely fitted, a small masterpiece of German engineering. And that, precisely, was the problem. So precise was its construction that a single gun took around 150 hours of skilled labor to produce and cost a small fortune. Germany was now fighting on two fronts, bleeding men and machines, and it needed machine guns not by the thousand, but by the hundreds of thousands cheaply and fast. You cannot handcraft a masterpiece hundreds of thousands of times. So the German army did something almost no one saw coming. It did not turn to a famous arms maker like Mauser or Rheinmetall. Instead, it held an open competition, and the winner was a small firm from the town of Dubon that had never built a gun in its entire history. Their trade was making lanterns, pressed steel railway lanterns, and the engineer who led the design, a man named Werner Gruner, knew next to nothing about machine guns. He was no weapons designer. He was a specialist in one very particular art: how to stamp and press shaped steel cheaply at enormous scale, which, as it turned out, was exactly what Germany needed. Gruner approached the whole problem the way only an outsider could, with no preconceptions at all. He enrolled in an army machine gun course. He sat down with frontline Wehrmacht soldiers and asked them what they truly needed. Then, instead of milling every part from a solid block of steel the way guns had always been made, he designed a weapon whose body could be stamped out of sheet metal and spot welded together. It cut the labor nearly in half. It swallowed far less of Germany's precious steel. And depending on the factory, it cost 30 to 50% less than the MG34. There was one more twist to Gruner's design, and it mattered enormously. He built the gun with looser internal tolerances than the exquisitely fitted MG34 on a firing range that cost a sliver of precision. But in the mud of Russia and the dust of North Africa, where the finely machined MG34 could clog and jam the rougher, cruder MG42 simply kept on firing. Cheaper, faster to build, and tougher in the filth of a real battlefield all at once. By the war's end, Germany would build something like 400,000 of them, an ocean of machine guns that no handcrafted masterpiece could ever have matched. And the gun that emerged from that lantern factory would become the most feared infantry weapon of the war. They called it the MG42. The very first thing anyone noticed about it was the rate of fire. A typical machine gun of that era fired perhaps 400 to 600 rounds a minute. The MG42 fired around 1,200, and some tests pushed it as high as 1,500. 25 bullets every single second. Underneath, it ran on a clever roller-locked, recoil-operated action with a booster at the muzzle to drive it faster. Still the fastest cycling machine gun of the war. That blistering rate was no accident, and no act of showmanship. It was a deliberate philosophy of killing. German designers had studied combat closely and reached a brutal conclusion. In a real firefight, the enemy is visible for only a heartbeat. A man darting between cover, a head above a trench. The gun that could hurl the most lead into that fraction of a second was the gun that would win the exchange. So they built a weapon designed to throw a wall of bullets in the blink of an eye. It fired so fast that the human ear could no longer separate one shot from the next. They fused into a single, tearing roar. The Germans, with grim affection, called it the Hitler's eggs, Hitler's bone saw to American G's. It was Hitler's Buzzsaw to the Red Army, the Linoleum Ripper to others still, simply the Spandau or Hitler's Zipper. Every one of those names is a man trying and failing to describe the same terrible sound. Imagine yourself pinned down in a field, and that noise erupts somewhere ahead of you. You cannot count the shots, because there is nothing to count, only a solid, unbroken wall of sound. You have no idea whether you face one gun or three. You know only that lifting your head means death. The sound alone before a single aimed shot could freeze an entire attack where it stood. Veterans would say you felt it in your chest before your mind caught up. A pure animal command to get down and stay down. And yet, here is something even the gun's fearsome reputation gets wrong. That storm of 1,200 rounds a minute could not last. Fire the MG42 flat out, and within seconds, the barrel would glow, then warp, then fail. A gunner could only fire in short, disciplined bursts, and even then, the barrel had to be swapped again and again to keep the gun from destroying itself. Factor in the barrel changes, the reloading, the aiming between bursts. And the MG42's true, sustainable rate of fire came out to only around 150 rounds a minute. That is the strange truth beneath the legend. On paper, the fastest gun of the war, in sustained practice, barely faster than the weapon it replaced. Its real weapon was never the raw number. It was that overwhelming volume in the first crucial seconds of contact and the sheer, paralyzing terror of the sound. Promote the best marksman, the steadiest hands, the coolest head, and you did not make him a rifleman. You put him behind the machine gun. But to truly understand the MG42, you have to stop picturing a gun a soldier carried and start seeing the beating heart of an entire way of war. Because the MG42 was not simply a powerful weapon the German squad happened to own. It was the reason the squad existed at all. The entire German infantry squad, around 10 men, was built around that one machine gun. The gunner was the single most important man in it. Everyone else, the riflemen, existed, in large part, to serve the gun. They hauled its ammunition. They shielded it. They scouted new positions for it when it had to move. The machine gun was the fist of the squad. The riflemen were the arm that swung it. And there was a hard reason the Germans built it this way. A reason that runs straight back to the rifle in those riflemen's hands. Because the ordinary German infantryman carried a bolt-action Kar 98K, one shot, then worked the bolt by hand, then one shot again, then the riflemen, each firing one slow round at a time, could never be the true source of a squad's firepower. So the machine gun had to be. Every ounce of the squad's killing power was concentrated into that single, roaring weapon. On defense, that concentration became something close to an art form. Whole German defensive lines were designed, quite literally, around where the machine guns could see and reach. The riflemen, the mortars, the very shape of the trenches, all of it existed to keep those guns firing. Mounted on its heavy Lafette tripod, fitted with an optical sight and a recoil buffer, a single MG42 could reach out and kill accurately at 2,000 yards and beyond. German gunners were trained to lay their fire in interlocking lanes so that the beaten zones of neighboring guns overlapped across a whole valley. To cross that ground was to walk into a web of invisible, crisscrossing streams of bullets. A few well-sighted MG42s, dug in and hidden, could hold up an entire advancing army. On the Eastern Front, in the endless mud and the killing cold, the MG42 came fully into its own, where finer weapons froze and fouled. The stamped steel gun just kept ripping. Soviet infantry, attacking in vast human waves across open ground, came to dread those interlocking German guns more than almost anything else on the front. And when it all came together, the result was the beach we began with. On the bluffs above Omaha, German machine guns firing down onto the sand turned the first waves of the greatest invasion in history into a massacre. Men came off the ramps into water already churning with fire, and the sound never stopped. And the sand filled with the fallen before they had loosed a single shot of their own. And it did not end on the beaches. In the tangled hedgerows just beyond them, a single hidden MG42 could turn one sunken lane into a wall of fire and stall an entire company for a day. But concentrating everything into one weapon carries a hidden, fatal danger. What happens the moment that one gun falls silent? A jammed belt, a barrel burned past its limit, a dead gunner slumped over his weapon. The instant the machine gun stopped, the German squad lost almost all its firepower in a single heartbeat, and collapsed back into a handful of men with bolt-action rifles. And the MG42 was ravenous, firing 25 rounds a second. It devoured ammunition and consumed barrels at a ferocious pace. Some crews were expected to carry as many as 6 spare barrels just to keep one gun in action. It took a whole team feeding the belts. swapping the glowing barrels with an asbestos glove, simply to keep that roar alive, and spare a thought for the two men chained to that gun, the gunner hunched behind the sights, and his loader beside him, threading a fresh belt into the feed and wrestling the spare barrels. They were a single organism built around a single machine, and wherever the gun went, the enemy's fire followed. The German squad had forged itself a magnificent, terrifying fist. But a fist is only as good as it is closed. Pry open a single finger, and the whole hand falls apart. Meanwhile, an ocean away, the Americans were about to answer that gun, not by building something that fired even faster, but with a completely different idea of where a squad's power should come from. If the German gun had been designed by a man who had never built one before, the American gun came from the exact opposite kind of mind. His name was John Moses Browning, and he may simply be the greatest firearms designer who ever lived, not merely in America, anywhere, in any era. If a 20th century American soldier picked up a weapon, the odds are good that Browning designed it. The pistol on his hip, the Colt 1911, was Browning's. The automatic rifle anchoring his squad, the BAR, was Browning's. The heavy .50 caliber gun on his tank, the one soldiers still carry into battle a century later, that was Browning's too. Over a single lifetime, he was granted 128 firearms patents. He earned the first at the age of 24. He was the son of a frontier gunsmith in Utah, and he had built his first working rifle as a teenager in his father's shop. Self-taught, relentless, and so far ahead of his time that companies on 2 continents fought for the right to build his designs. Where Gruner had come to the machine gun as a total outsider, Browning had lived and breathed guns since boyhood. 2 more different roads to the same battlefield are hard to imagine, and one of his creations was the machine gun that would carry America's infantry through the Second World War, the Browning M1919. It had grown out of a gun he designed in the First World War, refined and cooled by air rather than a heavy jacket of water, so it no longer needed a water tank to keep firing. Browning's guns had already carried America through 1 world war. His water-cooled, and 1917 reached the trenches of France in 1918 and cut down attacking waves with a cold, mechanical steadiness. The M1919 was that gun's leaner offspring, stripped of its heavy water jacket, cooled by the air itself, ready to be bolted to a tripod, a tank, a jeep, or an aircraft. Browning himself never saw it fight that war. He died in 1926 at his workbench, an ocean from home, in Belgium at the great firm that built his guns for the world, doing exactly what he had always done, bent over a design, chasing the next idea. He left behind an arsenal unlike anything one person had ever produced. Pistols, shotguns, rifles, and machine guns that would still be serving in one form or another a full century later. His .50 caliber heavy machine gun, the one soldiers nicknamed Ma Deuce, is, astonishingly, still in frontline service to this day, almost exactly as he drew it. But the gun he left behind was everything you would expect from a master. It was reliable, it was accurate, it was rugged, and it almost never let a soldier down. It fired the heavy, hard-hitting .30 caliber round from a long fabric belt off a steady tripod. In the hands of a good crew, it could hold a fixed lane of fire on a distant target all day, dropping its heavy rounds precisely where they were needed. There was just one measure on which it could not touch the German gun. The M1919 fired around 500 rounds a minute. The MG42 fired more than twice that. Set the two side by side, and on paper, it looks like no contest at all. The German gun was faster, newer, and infinitely more terrifying to stand in front of. So how, exactly, did the side with the slower machine gun win the war on the ground? To find the answer, you have to stop looking at the 2 machine guns altogether and look instead at the men standing around them. The answer is that America was never really trying to win the machine gun duel in the first place, because the American squad was not built around its machine gun. It was built around something else entirely, the ordinary rifleman. Remember the German squad, where the rifleman existed to serve one gun. The American squad was its mirror image, turned exactly inside out. Every single American infantryman carried a semi-automatic M1 Garand rifle that fired as fast as he could pull the trigger. Every man was, in himself, a source of rapid fire, so the squad's firepower did not flow from one weapon. It came from all of them, at once. This was the quiet revolution the Garand had made possible, and it reached all the way down into how the machine gun itself was used. At the center of each American squad sat one of Browning's other creations, the BA-AR, a heavy automatic rifle one soldier could carry and fire from the shoulder. Between that bar and a dozen fast-firing Garands, the American squad could raise a storm of fire without ever leaning on one irreplaceable gun. That single fact changed everything about where the machine gun belonged, since the rifleman already brought the volume. The belt-fed Browning did not need to be the center of the squad. It could be pushed up a level to the company and used as support, a heavy, steady anchor of fire, exactly where its reliability and its accuracy shone brightest. Freed from carrying the whole squad, the Browning could do the one thing it did better than the MG42: sit on its tripod and deliver patient, accurate, unhurried fire, precisely on target, for as long as it was needed. Consider what that means in the chaos of an actual fight. Silence a German squad's machine gun, and you have torn out most of its teeth. You have left it a handful of men with bolt-action rifles. But an American squad had no single gun to silence. Its firepower was spread across a dozen men, each holding a rifle that spat 8 fast rounds at a time. And when a Garand ran dry, the soldiers slammed in a fresh 8-round clip in a heartbeat and kept firing. One more reason the American squad never fully fell silent. Cut down any one of them, and 11 more keep firing. Pin a German squad, kill the man behind the machine gun, and the roar simply stops and the field falls quiet enough to move. Pin an American squad, and there is no single death that turns the noise off. One squad's strength poured from a single, magnificent weapon. The others came from everywhere at once. Imagine an American squad caught in the open, and a German gun opening up on them from a tree line. There is no one weapon they must protect at all costs. No single gunner whose loss would leave them helpless. A dozen riflemen go to ground, and a dozen Garands begin to answer a rolling, uneven crackle of fire from a dozen different points, impossible to silence with one lucky burst. The bar rakes the tree line. The squad works forward in rushes, one group firing while another moves. And the firepower never once depends on a single, silenceable gun. Now, none of this means the Americans were not afraid of the MG42. They were terrified of it. So terrified that the fear itself became a military problem. By 1944, so many green replacements were freezing at the mere sound of the buzzsaw that the War Department made a film about it. Officially, it was a training film. In truth, it was closer to propaganda. It staged side-by-side demonstrations of American and German guns, and it made one careful argument. Yes, the German gun fired faster, but all that speed cost it accuracy, and the steadier American guns were deadlier where it counted, and it closed with a line meant to calm a frightened young soldier's nerves. Its bark is worse than its bite. It would have been a hard line to sell to the survivors of Omaha Beach. The film's very existence tells you everything. No army makes a movie to calm its soldiers about a weapon that isn't working. But buried inside that reassurance was a real truth, the one thing the film got exactly right. That furious rate of fire really did come at the cost of accuracy and control. The American guns really were steadier, and America wanted the MG42's firepower far more than any training film would ever admit. In fact, American engineers took a captured MG42 and tried to build a direct copy of their own, a gun called the T-24. It failed. Scaled up to the larger American cartridge. The design choked and jammed, and the project was quietly abandoned. On the islands of the Pacific, Marines went further still, tearing machine guns out of wrecked aircraft, bolting rifle stocks onto them, and hauling them into battle by hand, just to get something close to the MG42's rate of fire. One Marine carried such an improvised gun into the hell of Iwo Jima and earned the Medal of Honor with it. And America's official attempt to turn the Browning itself into a one-man squad gun came out so heavy and so awkward that one writer likened it to bolting a shoulder stock onto a boulder. So no man for man, gun for gun, America never did match the MG42, and here is the twist at the center of this entire story. It did not have to. Because the American way of war had already solved the problem of firepower by a completely different route, not by forging one perfect gun, but by placing a fast-firing rifle in the hands of every single soldier. Germany had poured its genius into the machine gun and built the finest one in the world. America had spread its firepower across the whole squad, and so never had to depend on any single weapon at all. The Garand in every man's hands had quietly rewritten the arithmetic of the infantry squad, and no single German machine gun, however brilliant, could rewrite it back. And that is the factor that truly decided it. The deciding difference was never the MG42 against the Browning. It was one army that staked its squad on a single, magnificent gun, against another that turned every man into a source of fire. So let us do what we always do, and score these two weapons honestly, one category at a time: rate of fire and raw suppressive power. The MG42, and it is not remotely close. 1,200 rounds a minute against 500. Nothing the Allies fielded could answer that wall of fire. As a light, one-man gun a squad could carry forward into the assault. The MG42 again. This was a true general-purpose weapon. A light gun on its bipod one moment, a sustained fire gun on its tripod the next. America's attempt to match that flexibility was a clumsy afterthought. Steady, accurate fire from a fixed position, hour after hour. Here, at last, the Browning takes a round. The Browning was calmer, easier to control, and it did not devour its barrels and its ammunition the way the German gun did. Reliability in mud, dust, and freezing cold. Call that one a draw. Both guns were famously, stubbornly dependable. So gun for gun, on the range. The MG42 wins the contest. It was, quite simply, the better machine gun. Faster, more flexible, more terrifying, and every bit as reliable on almost every line of the scorecard. The German gun comes out ahead, and it still ended up on the losing side, because this was never truly a duel between two guns on the surface. It looked like a clash of weapons. Underneath, it was a clash of two ideas. Germany believed a squad's power should be concentrated, poured into one magnificent weapon, and served by everyone around it. America believed it should be distributed, spread across every man, so that no single loss could ever break it. And a fist, however powerful, can be caught and pinned and stopped. Firepower spread across 12 men is far, far harder to switch off. The MG42 won very nearly every duel it ever fought, and the idea behind it still lost the war. And that is the lesson that outlived the war itself. The most magnificent weapon is not always the one that wins. Sometimes the deciding edge is not a better gun at all, but a better idea about who should carry it. And now we come to the part that no specification sheet will ever show you. The price and the men who paid it. Consider, for a moment, what it meant to be the man behind that gun. The German machine gunner was the most dangerous man on the battlefield, and that made him the most hunted. There is a bitter irony folded into that. The very things that made the German squad so lethal, one gun, one gunner. All that concentrated power were the same things that made it so fragile, and its gunners so doomed. That terrible, unmistakable sound did not merely announce where the bullets were coming from. It painted a target squarely on the gunner's back. Every rifle, every mortar, every artillery observer on the other side went looking for that sound first. Knock out the machine gun, and the whole squad fell apart, so the machine gun was the very first thing everyone tried to kill. In a hot sector, the life expectancy of an MG42 gunner could be measured in minutes. He might set up, fire off a few long bursts, and be dead or driven from his position before the enemy's reply had even landed then. Do it all again, somewhere new. For as long as his luck held out, and the men who fed him his belts, the men who lay pressed beside him, were caught in the very same storm because everything the enemy threw was aimed at that sound. The weapon that made him so lethal was the same weapon that marked him for death. There is a grim arithmetic in it. The better the gunner, the longer he fired, the more certain his own death became, because every burst was another signal, screaming his position to every enemy within earshot. Some fired until the barrel glowed white and the enemy was almost on top of them. Many did not live to change it. And then there were the others, the men on the receiving end. Think back, one last time, to that young American in the water off Omaha, pressed flat against a steel obstacle or into the wet sand, listening to a sound like tearing cloth pass again and again just over his head. Of the 30-odd men who had crouched with him in that landing craft, many never made it off the beach. His company was gutted in 5 minutes by guns he never even saw. And multiply that one beach, that one company, across 1,000 fields and forests and river crossings, on both fronts, for years. That is what it meant to fight against and behind a gun like this. That is the real cost, on both sides of that weapon, and no tally of numbers will ever quite hold it. Ask any veteran who faced it, and he will not describe the rate of fire, or the roller-locked action, or the clever stamped steel. He will describe the sound, always the sound. And there is a final irony to the MG42. The war its makers lost did nothing to kill their gun. If anything, it made it immortal. When the shooting stopped, the world's armies did not turn away from the Buzzsaw. They chased it. West Germany brought the gun back into service, rechambered for the new NATO cartridge, as the MG3 and versions of it are still in the field today. More than 80 years after Werner Gruner first sketched it in his lantern factory, and America, the nation that had tried and failed to copy it during the war, finally learned its lesson when it came time to build a new machine gun for Korea and Vietnam. American designers borrowed the MG42's ideas at last and produced the belt-fed M60, a gun for soldiers who carried it, simply called the Pig. The very concept the MG42 perfected the single. Do everything. General-purpose machine gun is now the foundation of nearly every army on Earth. The gun an American soldier fires from a bipod or a vehicle today. The M240 is a direct descendant of that idea, built, as it happens, by the same Belgian firm where John Browning spent his final days. Shrink that same concept down to a lighter cartridge, and you get the M249, the little belt-fed gun an American squad carries today, doing for the modern rifleman almost exactly what the MG42 once did for the German one. 80 years on, in conflicts Gruner and Browning could never have imagined, their machine guns, or their direct descendants, are still, very often, the loudest thing on the battlefield. Two rival philosophies, two rival nations, and in the end, their weapons became cousins. The Buzzsaw that once tore across Omaha Beach, and the steady Browning that answered it, both flowed into the same river of design. A river that runs straight into the guns soldiers carry right now. So come back, one final time, to the two men who started all of this. Werner Gruner, an engineer who had never designed a weapon in his life, plucked from a factory that made lanterns, who built the most feared gun of the war out of stamped sheet metal. And John Browning, perhaps the greatest gunmaker who ever lived, who armed a nation and then died at his workbench, an ocean from home, before he could ever see his guns go to war. Two men, two machine guns, and two completely opposite ideas of how a nation ought to fight. So let me leave you with one question. We have been asking which gun was better, and by most measures, the answer is clear enough. The MG42 was the finer weapon. But better has never been quite the same thing as right. If you had one hill to hold and one squad to hold it with, which would you choose? The squad built around a single, magnificent machine gun, the Buzzsaw, that could stop an army in its tracks, right up until the instant it fell silent. Or the squad where there was no single gun to silence at all, because every last man was a weapon, the perfect gun, or the perfect system. I have told you what I believe decided the war on the ground. But which one you would want at your side when the ramp dropped and the shooting began, that one is yours to decide. Tell me in the comments, the Buzzsaw or the system, and tell me why.
Thanks for staying until the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Your support is incredibly valuable to us and helps this channel grow.